there, I swear I'm not just buttering you up, but Metro State, like talking with students who are truly engaged about psychology is my absolute favorite audience to have. So I'm really excited I get to talk and be a little nerdy and talk about like the research studies, which when I do, I get the glazed over look at most of my seminars. They're like, can we just, I don't care that it's called cognitive dissonance. Can you just get on with it? I'm like, what? It's so fascinating. So thank you for being here and for being present and giving me your attention and time today. I really appreciate it. So like Mackenzie said, we're talking about beating the winter blues today. And before I jump into the content, I want you all to just think, either write it down or just take a second to think of some answers to these questions. First, brutally honest opinion about how you feel about winter. Now, hold on to your thoughts. Don't share them yet. Don't share them yet. Just hold on to them, but keep them close because we're gonna share in a little bit. Your brutal, honest opinions and feelings about winter. And what words come to mind when you think about winter, which kind of can help spark that. How do you feel about winter? And I swear, I promise we're getting to positive psychology, but right now, just because it's what we like to do in Minnesota is complain about winter. What is the worst part about winter? What makes it, I mean, it's hard on a lot of us, right? And I would think that's maybe why you cued in, right? So think about what is the worst part about winter? What's, right now I can't really feel my toes because I'm in the basement, which I don't care for too much. But other than that, is there anything in general that comes to mind about what's really hard about winter? I'm already seeing some answers. We'll come back to them. You can put them there, but I'll come back to them, I promise. Well, it's because you're on the sunny terrace, Mark. It's not too cold on the sunny Madison Terrace. It's magical there. Okay, so why is it that sunny in my mind? That's all that matters, right? We'll get to that too, Mark. I like that. So what causes seasonal affective disorder? So seasonal, how many of you have heard of seasonal affective disorder? Just like raise your hand and you're a couple people, right? So seasonal affective disorder, thank you, Mark. And yeah, okay, sweet. I'm getting some answers here. So seasonal affective disorder is kind of like when these winter blues become a little bit more to handle, right? So it's an actual diagnosis you can get from a clinician or a psychologist. And it's kind of when all the symptoms we're about to talk about get to the point where it's really hard to function during the winter months, during the shorter days. So some causes, there's a lot of theories around what causes this like winter blues, right? So winter blues kind of, defines all these things that we kind of were thinking about, like, why is it so hard? And I just want to make sure I didn't, nope, okay, hold on to your answers still. I just want to make sure I didn't miss your opportunity to share. There's a few different reasons as to why winter tends to be correlated with this kind of low energy, sad affect, kind of withdrawn state that people kind of end up being in. And it seems to be tied to a couple different things. The first one is their circadian rhythm. So this is kind of that internal clock that's within our biology that syncs biological function with the time of day. So it's what tells us, okay, it's nighttime now, it's sleepy time, right? Versus time to wake up. The other thing is melatonin, melatonin levels. Who knows what melatonin does? Sure, you've all probably heard about it, especially now because people are like eating pills of it. It makes you sleep. Thank you, Evelyn. If you go by Evelyn, I hope you do. So it makes you sleep, right? It's a chemical it's secreted. It's a hormone that makes your body kind of start to feel tired and restful so that it makes you fall into sleep, right? And in the winter time, and by winter, I mean like shorter days, right? It seems to be tied to, hang on, let me get this right, higher levels of melatonin in the winter. So if it makes you sleepy, it makes sense. If you're getting more of it, you end up, admit Alex here, it makes sense that you would feel more sleepy, right? If you have more melatonin. And this is something that's not only seen in humans, it's also seen in a lot of animals, particularly mammals, that change their behavior in the winter. So when we're looking at like bears that hibernate, right? They tend to have higher levels of melatonin in the winter too. Makes sense. Helps them sleep for many months, and then they wake up when it starts to get sunnier and warm out. So it seems to be kind of related to these different aspects. And the main theory, where I get to nerd out, is called the phase shift hypothesis. So this is kind of this idea that is when our circadian rhythm ends up getting mixed up with, just want to make sure, again, I didn't lose your opportunity to share, is when our biological clock, right, that channels all these different biological functions, it's mixed up when the days are shorter. So it actually gets out of sync with the actual time of day. So your body starts thinking, instead of it being 4:30, where you haven't even had dinner yet, it's so dark out, you start thinking, oh, it's time for bed, right? Because your body is getting all these external cues, and it's channeling into your brain and telling your body that, start secreting melatonin, start getting ready for bed, get sleepy so you can rest, right? And one thing, I already talked about melatonin. Perfect. So the one other thing though about melatonin that I thought was really interesting is related to our hypothalamus. So going way back to either intro psych or biopsych, does anyone remember what your hypothalamus is responsible for? You can type it in or you can raise your hand. I'm watching. Mood question. Ooh, can be a little bit related to mood. That's not incorrect. It's just not a full answer. Yes, getting closer, telling you when to eat, sleep, hormones. Yes. So all of these things together make up. I don't know if you guys can hear my daughter screaming at the door. She might also be joining us for a little bit. Dad is doing his best, but sometimes, Jessica can explain. Or dad doesn't always cut it. So yes, our hypothalamus is responsible for regulating a lot of these core body functions. And so this semester, I'm also teaching psychology of motivation and emotion. And so it's related to what we call drive states. And drive states, kind of a very brief explanation would be, it's the changes within our body. It's like the feeling or sensation we have within our body to get our needs met. And so it's the things that cue us for like eating or sleeping, right? So it's like, if we need to eat, it makes us hungry. If we need to sleep, it makes us sleepy, right? And so people with seasonal affective disorder tend to sleep more, eat more, right? They tend to be undermotivated. And so these are all cues that tell us, hey, it might be related to our hypothalamus, which I find quite interesting, even though I am not a biopsychologist, but when I can connect it, I find it fascinating. So the other thing is, does anyone remember what serotonin does? Or is responsible for? Bingo. Oh, nice. So it's actually a mood regulator, and Ellen says it makes you happy, right? So it's actually a mood regulator, mood stabilizer. That's more of a, anyway, it doesn't really matter. But yes, it makes you happy, right? And it is another hormone that is regulated by our hypothalamus. So again, if serotonin is related to happiness or joy or, an energy and all these positive things that we want to feel, and we're feeling all those things lower in wintertime, again, it cues us that, hey, it might be related to our hypothalamus. Oh, the other thing that I found interesting is that, I don't know if that was in here. So the hypothalamus also secretes something called the active thyroid hormone. And so that is lowered in people with seasonal affective disorder, the SAD. And this is what's responsible for your serotonin. So your active thyroid hormone kind of cues serotonin levels. And so lower active thyroid hormone is what leads to lower levels of serotonin. So I just want to make sure I clarify that so you kind of have all the pieces there. Okay, so those are kind of some of the causes of why is it winter sucks so much, psychologically speaking. And hang on, I'm gonna just close the chat so I can actually see more folks on my screen. Any questions or comments on that? No, okay, cool. So moving on, this is more interesting stuff anyway. So what is it that you said was the worst part of winter? Let me see, hang on, let me scroll up here. Lack of energy, I heard. Having to do layers of clothes. Less social interaction. Darkness. Mackenzie. That's me too. Anyone else have anything that they want to add? You can either unmute, because it's a small enough group. You can either unmute or you can type it in the chat if you want. Stuck inside. So it's not only lack of light, but it's also the light we have is kind of artificial, right? Oh, what was I going to ask? Increased illnesses. Ooh, interesting. Yeah, we kind of are, there's different reasons why that might be, right? It does. It seems like we're just always sick. And now it's even more complicated with COVID and testing, et cetera, et cetera. I heard someone tell me, I think they probably saw it on social media. I'm not huge into social media, so I have no idea where this was or even if it's accurate. But I found the effect, it doesn't really matter if what I'm about to say is accurate, but the effect of hearing it is what I'm interested in. So they told me, hey, yeah, I read online that in 79 days, no, in 37 days, 37 days, the sun is going to start setting around 7 p.m. The sun will be out at 7 p.m. or like the sunset will still, like it will still have light. So how does this feel to hear? Is it Tanya? I feel like I've met you before, Tanya. Okay. I'm seeing her smile, so exciting. Thank you, amazing, can't wait. We all feel this way about sunlight, right? It's definitely not like, more sun, I don't want more sun, right? So it's definitely tied to how much sun we're seeing, right? So there's a couple interesting stories I came across when I was doing this research. So a lot of this research happens to be, not surprisingly, done in like Scandinavia, right? So like the land of, having an hour of sunlight if you're lucky, right, in the winter. And so there are a couple of interesting, I guess, what's the word? I want to say interventions, but like solutions to this issue that Norwegians and the Swedish have come across to kind of make themselves feel better in December, January. And the first one is there's a small town in Norway. I just want to make sure, yep, Norway, who it was in 1928, Norsk Hydro is the company that decided to just build a cable car and people could just ride up to this top of this mountain and get closer to the sunlight and experience daylight longer into the day because they're going up so high that the sun hasn't quite set, right? If you're going higher in altitude. And they found that really helped morale, right? And then about a decade or so later, this man, Martin Anderson, he lived in a small town called, I don't know, Rjukan, R-J-U-K-A-N. Not sure if anyone speaks Norwegian, please correct me. But he got a grant to get 3 humongous mirrors and put them on the side of the mountain that was near the town. And he aimed them so that it extended daylight in the town square. So normally the town square had daylight from like noon to 2, and this actually extended it by a few hours. And what he found was that, not surprisingly, people would just come outside and go straight, be drawn to the town square and just soak up more sunlight, and it completely shifted like the culture and the like the energy, right? The energy and feel of the town. And so I thought that was just really interesting. I'm like, wow, so we've been dealing with this since forever, right? And like there's history, like books back to like 600 that show that people have demonstrated like something that looks like seasonal affective disorder. So some interesting current research that's going on is since 2015, it's kind of this ongoing thing. In Sweden, there's this study going on to take a look at the effect of light on students. So these are middle schoolers, they're like 14, 15. And there's like there's only one experimental lucky classroom. All the other classrooms, you enter in school when it's dark and you leave to go home when it's dark. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Fortunately, right? Those first, very long days of, like right around, December, right around Christmas, it feels like they get really short. And so what they did was they decided to take students, put them in this classroom where they actually, this is not a very accurate picture. This is just from the free Prezi pictures, but they put curtains up, like blackout curtains, so students couldn't actually see the outside, but they installed these special lights that changed color, hue, and like temperature, color, hue, and brightness throughout the day to mimic a springtime day. So that they would show up and it would be dark outside, but they'd show up, enter the classroom, and it's like bright, like the sun, right? Like the sun is out, and it's a little bit of adjustment for a little bit, but then they sit down and they kind of start their day, and it feels like the sun is, in their room. It kind of is meant to mimic an outdoor classroom. And what they found is that there's no like they haven't found like a correlation between the students and like their performance in terms of grades, etc. But what they have found is that the students in the like bright classroom show better sleep habits. So they actually sleep better through the night and they don't wake up as frequently. And when they wake up, it feels more of like a up and ready, right? And it's not this sluggish, like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed, right? I don't know if anyone else feels that way every day this time of year, but that's certainly me. And so it kind of showed this shift, right? And that circadian rhythm of their body kind of felt like, okay, at the end of the day, it felt more like the end of the day as opposed to it feeling like the end of the day in the middle of the day. I also thought it was interesting. They increased the brightness after lunch. So they like crank it up. These poor preteens, right? They're like cranking it up right after lunch when they're feeling so sleepy. And they found that that really helps with their energy level. They've also improved their concentration and their better mood. And that's just based on observation, as not as much as like actual measurements, right? But it seems to be helping. Yeah, okay. So the other thing, how many of you have heard of light clinics? Or does anyone know how we typically treat seasonal affective disorder? With lights, right? I'm kind of seeing a couple people talk, right? Yeah, right, with lights, right? And these are not just like a regular light bulb that you buy at Menards. You do? Do you feel like it helps, Mackenzie? Do you get to use it a lot?
I think that it can help, but I have noticed that if I leave it on too long into the day, that it kind of keeps me up. And I don't know if this is an actual correlation, but I find that I get more headaches when I use it. So, but it does, yeah, sometimes a little bit help.
that could be, I mean, I get migraines, so you don't have to tell me about bright lights and, and headaches. I can only imagine, right? But I would imagine the brighter the light, the more intense it is on your eyes, which explains kind of eye strain, which would lead to, some headaches. Hang on, I saw someone put something in the chat. Oh yeah, full spectrum lights. Yeah, thank you. Is it Zarina? Yeah, Zarina, I feel like is what my gut is telling me to say. So I'll go with that. Thank you for, thank you. Okay, good. Zarina. So, yes, so lights, like even if they're artificial, right? Ideally, you want to go out into the sun, not into the sun. You want to go outside where you feel the real sun, is what I'm trying to say. But artificial lights that have full spectrum qualities that mimic the sun can improve mood, which is exactly the kind that they had in this. Let me cut off here. In this study, right? These ones are super fancy and they kind of naturally change throughout the day and blah, 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 blah. But if you go in to a doctor and are actually given a prescription, you can actually get a seasonal affective disorder light, like Mackenzie was talking about. It's actually like a prescribed, I don't know, there's a word for it. Instead of like a prescription medication, it's like a prescriptive machine. I can't remember. Oh, nice. Oh, Mackenzie got hers on Amazon. You can also do that. It used to be a lot trickier to get. So anyway, years ago, before these were more common in like the US, especially because we're not as bad off, right? With the exception of Alaska. We're not as bad off as like Sweden. They had actual clinics that people would, go in and they'd sign up for 2-hour time slots in the day, and they'd show up and they're in these white, everything is white. The description said the only thing that wasn't white was the coffee grounds for the staff. Everything's white from the floors to the ceiling, to the walls, to the furniture. And you sit and you absorb, the imitation light. What was interesting is that they actually had a falling out after 2007. There was a study that I think it was the Swedish Institute for Mental Health, and something like interventions for mental health. I wish I wrote it down. I wrote down the year. I forgot to say exactly what it was, but it was some institution in Sweden that studies mental health interventions. And they found that, after looking at the studies, et cetera, that there was no strong evidence to prove that light clinics actually improve seasonal affective disorder, right? And what we know as psychologists is, does that mean they don't work? Not necessarily, right? But when the study came out, that's how the media portrayed it. It kind of reminds me of, if you guys remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was one study that showed something about gaiters and how they made it worse or something, right? And then everyone is like, you can't wear gaiters, it's gonna make the virus spread, right? It's kind of like that. The media portrayed it in a way that wasn't actually accurate to the real study. And the guy who kind of spearheaded the movement of light clinics, kind of laughed, and he's like, well, yeah, of course we would ideally do, like you do for pharmaceuticals, a double-blind study with, a placebo and a clinical, blah, 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 blah. But he's like, but what do you use as a placebo for the sun? You can't really, or for like light, right? There's not really a placebo you can use. So it's interesting because it's this clinical diagnosis and it seems to help with these lights, but you can't quite get the right data, I guess, to prove that it's effective. So moving on. I wanted to hear, this is where I was really interested in, what did you all say about how you feel about winter? You can feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute, either one. Miserable. Thank you, Mackenzie. Or words, except Christmas. Interesting. We'll come back to that. Long. Yeah. A little too long. Fatigue. Anyone else? Does anyone complain, like have people in their life in like that live elsewhere, and you either do one of two things: you tell them like how miserable it is because they live in Florida, or you keep it quiet, choose not to tell them how cold it is. I have coworkers in New York, and I try not to be that person that makes it a competition, but when they were complaining about it being 20 degrees, and this was a couple of weeks ago, when it was like, I turned on my car and it said -17, I'm like, I can't be here for this conversation. So my friend lives in South Carolina and they have more snow than us right now. Interesting. Oh, that global warming, man, the climate change is gonna make everybody understand it. Thank you for sharing. So typically we kind of have this like, it's winter, you know, I kind of, as soon as I really hate daylight savings time, because it does end up having this, go away. I don't know what just popped up. There we go. Okay. I have this like dread about daylight savings, because it makes it feel like, okay, now we're going into the deep, dark, long days of winter. And it feels like I have a lot of dread around that. I don't know if anyone else shares that with me, but there's a lot of dread as we enter, like when we get close to Halloween. I really don't like Halloween. So another thing that the research tends to pick at, now that we've all complained about, you know, gotten vented a little bit, is that a lot of it, not all of it, some of it is related to mindset. So I have here, I used to have a pug growing up, and if any of you know pugs, they don't like the cold and they don't like the hot. They're very picky. So this poor pug is like, oh, it's autumn. It's not even autumn, it's still green, right? He's like, it's so cold, right? And what the research tells us is, if we kind of think this way of like, ugh, I don't want to go outside, it looks so miserable, we're going to be more miserable, right? As opposed to this golden retriever, which totally reminds me of my doofy poodle that I have right now. Loves to go outside and just give me all the snow, right? Like I can be outside forever. It's so much fun, and it's something you can't experience in the summer. And so how is it that we go from this to this, right? And Carrie Leibowitz is the main researcher that studies this. And in 2014, she was talking about how she made a scale called the Winter Mindset Survey, or scale, Winter Mindset Scale. And she studied different longitude, this way, north and south, right, in Sweden. And she went from like Norway, from Oslo all the way up north. And what she found was, the farther north you got, the more people actually appreciated and enjoyed winter. They actually talked about winter as being enjoyable. And so this kind of came into this idea of culture. So how many of you have heard of any of these? I'm going to give a stab at saying them. I think the Swedish word is yoga. You'd think that I'm Swedish, right? I'm not. Gezellig is the Norwegian word, and then Gezellig is the Dutch word. That one I do know, because my ancestors are all Dutch, and my mom would always talk about Gezellig as being this like, well, I'm not going to give it away. Does anyone know what any of these are? Has anyone heard of these? Never heard of them. Thank you, Mackenzie. No. They're kind of new. They're in the pop psych stuff, like, ooh, try to have more yoga. See, Mark? I don't know if you are just excited to learn about it, or if you actually know what it means. I appreciate the exclamation point. So it's this idea of like, my mom would call it comfy cozy. So it's this idea of enjoying the dark and the comfort of kind of bundling up and like getting comfy and like hunkering down with candles and a nice fire. Thank you. That's actually on here. This, right? Sitting next to the fire with a blanket and a book, kind of the romance of winter. It's actually, it's bigger than that. It's like your home can feel this way too. It's kind of the comfy, cozy welcoming cup of hot chocolate. Thank you. Yes, all these are all excellent examples. Candles and tea. And it's this is a word that they have in this part of the world that we can kind of relate to it, but it's not a word we have in like American English. So it just shows that it's something that's really deeply ingrained in their culture, is this appreciation for what winter is and what it can bring that is not in other parts of the year, right? Another thing that she found is that it's what this gal in the nice big fur coat is supposed to represent, is they're not worried about how they look in the winter. They're not worried about fashion. And so they're much more concerned with function and staying warm so that when they go outside, they're comfortable, right? Whereas here we kind of, I don't know, I just bought some new Sorels because they were cute this year and they have like no insulation. My feet are always cold. And so I'm like already regretting this. I'm like, I need to just go to like Fleet Farm. Like what is it that the farmers wear? That's what I want. I want what I can wear outside for hours. And so I want to make sure I'm not missing any of this. Oh yeah, and so another piece she found was that parts of the world, like these parts of the world do, is that they change, they kind of get more creative. Like I mentioned earlier, right? They get creative with how they manage the lack of light. So after 2 p.m., when the sun sets, they turn on these huge floodlights on the playground equipment, so that kids can still go out and play and see what they're doing at the playground. And when she asked this mom, she's like, so are these lights always on? She's like, well, yeah. She's like, okay, like, that's interesting. And she's like, well, yeah, if we didn't have lights like this out, we would never get out of the house. And so there's also this concept of like the importance of getting out of the house, right? And so, and bundling up and wearing the appropriate clothes so that you're comfortable in going out. Okay, anything tripped there? In anyone want to add anything? I love all your examples of Hizelig. And I lived in Duluth. They say embracing the cold. The culture up there is to be active and outside as much as possible. Absolutely, Zarina, nice. Oh yes, please make sure you sign the attendance sheet too, if you haven't already. Yes, and that's very similar. I feel like Duluth does have a very special, thank you, Mackenzie. So Colorado has kind of a similar mindset. I'd imagine too, like up in the mountains, right, where you're kind of have to be prepared for any kind of weather. It changes throughout the day. I would imagine that that's kind of similar, right? You kind of just flow with it, because if you're angry about it, it doesn't change the weather, right? I try to tell my dad that, he doesn't believe me. Interesting. Thank you, Mark. I have more yoga in December than February. We'll get to that too. We'll get to that when I'm talking about tips for what we can do. Because what is it? Oh yeah, the first snow is better than the 7th, and the 7th is better than the 13th. Yeah. Especially, I mean, it's like the snow gets uglier. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. So what is it about December? And someone, I can't remember who it was that mentioned it, but there's something special about like, that's a little more special about early on in winter. What is it that's holidays? Thank you, Mackenzie. So we have cookies, absolutely. Jessica, cookies are good every, all the time. They're good all the time. Although I will, yeah, family and friends gatherings, right? Like, and that comes with holidays, but it doesn't have to. But it seems to be, we kind of get together. We kind of like almost this romance of the season, right? So we'll come back to that too. I want to make sure that you know that. So I'm going to talk here for how is it that we can integrate all the stuff that we were just talking about, all the research, into what is it that we can do, since we don't live where they have floodlights and magic mirrors that bring the light to us. How is it that we can manage through the winter? So the first thing is bright light. Okay, so bright light meaning like that like Mackenzie's sad light, or going outside to the actual sun, right? Now the trick is, it's like it's good any time of the day for a number of reasons, but sooner the better in the day. And the reason for this is your melatonin, right? What causes the imbalance with the melatonin is that it's still in your body, and then your alarm clock goes off, and then you open your eyes and you look outside, and it doesn't look like you're supposed to be getting up. It feels unnatural, right? So your brain is really struggling to make that shift into time to get up and start the day. So the sooner you can get bright light into your brain, into your eyes, into your brain is going to get cued into, okay, let's flood all this melatonin out because we're no longer needing to sleep, and let's get the day moving. So it's really key to like the timeline actually of getting that bright light. The next part is getting outside, which we have mentioned a couple of times, and I'm not going to talk too much about this because the next self-care symposium in April is going to be on the positive psychology of being outside, of green space, etc. So, but there are benefits, right, to being outside that we know of. So the first one is that it increases your energy, right? So fresh air kind of, it has better quality, well, depending on where you live, unfortunately, but has better qualities than stale inside air. And it will, if you're outside, you'll get natural vitamin D. Most of us are deficient. Almost all of us actually in Minnesota are deficient. So if you don't take vitamin D, maybe talk to your doctor about that, because that changed my life a little drastically a few months ago. And cold air actually jolts our stress response. So it actually will, it's kind of like when you think about when you run out of like a hot sauna or like a hot tub and jump in the pool or like into the lake, right? It kind of is this, it's painful, but it also feels so refreshing. It's activating and deactivating your sympathetic nervous system. So it's kind of messing with your stress response and triggering it, but then calming it down. So fresh air and cold air especially has that quality as well. Like cold showers, yeah, they're supposed to be good for you. I can't, unless I sit in the tub for a very long time and I'm very hot, then I can take a cold shower. I want to be the type of person that can. In the winter, does getting outside, even on a cloudy day, have these benefits too? Oh, good question, Serena. Yeah, not as much vitamin D, of course, right? Because there's not as much sun, but the other benefits, absolutely. So movement is always good for your body. It increases blood flow and oxygen flow to your brain and to other parts of your body. It will decrease your stress response, which is always a good thing, and increase serotonin levels, which is also a good thing, right? That'll boost your mood. So movement, especially outdoors, but any kind of movement. If it's like it was a couple of weeks ago, it's downright painful to be outside. Moving indoors is just sometimes all we can do, but it's also a huge help. Good question. To Jessica's point, carbs. Carbs feel nice, don't they? Does anyone else like carbs? I really like carbs, right? Does anyone know why carbs feel so good? I had to look this up because I know why they're not so good for us to eat too much of or consume too much of.
Don't they help us store energy?
They do. They help us store a lot of things. Energy is one. So they actually, it's kind of, depending on the type of carb, I'm not a nutritionist, so I'll just say that right away, right? But they give us energy to burn right away. So if you have like a high carb breakfast or like lots of sugar, right? Like a sugar rush, it feels really nice and it feels really kind of powerful and energizing. But then you have a crash, similar to caffeine, which I'm going to get to in a second. I also really love. But carbs also are stored in our body and turned into fat, which has the opposite effect, right? It'll actually slow us down. Carbs also boost serotonin. So I was thinking, so I actually talked to my therapist about this because my carb of choice is beer. My husband brews beer. And so I love beer, and I'm like, do I have to worry about having this like love and appreciation for beer? She's like, Laura, in the winter and like in the pandemic, a lot of us are eating a lot more sugar, eating a lot more bread, and like drinking a lot of things like beer because it's increasing our serotonin levels. And we're not getting natural serotonin from like friends and family like we normally do, or hugs, or going out and doing hobbies that we used to be able to do. So just thought I'd share that. That's, if you've been eating a lot of carbs, it's not just you. But this always reminds me of in high school, I had a friend who was on the wrestling team. And if any of you ever knew a guy in the wrestling team, they had to like cut weight was what they called it. They had to like make a certain weight class. Anyway, he had to cut all the carbs out of his diet to like lose a bunch of weight really quickly. And he was the meanest version of himself when he had low carbs. And I always think of that. I'm like, that's right, because carbs really boost your mood. They really do. So if you have a moody guy in your life, just give him some spaghetti and feel a little bit better. Any of us would feel better with some spaghetti, but for some reason, guys don't quite, it doesn't quite click as quickly. The last thing I was going to mention too, not the last, but the last on this slide was caffeine. So the way caffeine works, how many of you like caffeine? Coffee, I love coffee. Coffee in the morning is just, that's another one, that's my yoga in the morning, right? It's just a nice warm cup of coffee. It helps me kind of ease into the day. But caffeine, when you have too much of it, your body, so everyone knows about a caffeine crash, right? Like a coffee crash in the afternoon. So if you have, a lot of it, then you get all jittery and excited, right? And energized, but then after a little while, you kind of have the slump, especially if you have those carbs with lunch, right? And what ends up happening is actually if you use caffeine every day, your kind of baseline level of energy goes down and you get more dependent on caffeine. So even to get to your baseline level of energy, you actually need more caffeine. So it hurts my heart to even say this out loud, but it works in the body physiologically a lot like drug. It is a drug. It's classified as a drug. So it's just legal and pretty mild. But it does, your body gets used to it. And so it kind of reacts to caffeine in this way. And the reason I mentioned caffeine, you're probably thinking, aren't we here about winter blues? I tend to drink a lot more caffeine in the winter because I feel like I don't have energy. So then I feel like I'm compensating by drinking more coffee or getting coffee in the afternoon, when in reality, it might help for that, the next hour or so. But if you do that a lot, your body's actually going to react in a way where you're going to be more tired because your body needs more caffeine to function. So that's why I mention it, because I feel like, especially in college, I was drinking a lot of coffee. I was up to like a good pot of coffee a day, at least. So I just want to mention that in case anyone else is in a similar boat. So let's see here. The last slide, may not be the last, the next slide. These are things that are always good for us. And they're particularly important in the winter. So the first one is connection. Support from friends, family, just getting out and seeing people, right? Feeling connected and not lonely, preventing loneliness is really key in getting through these shorter days and what feels like longer months. Exercise, womp womp, right? We know that exercise is good for us. Exercise improves serotonin levels. It increases your motivation, actually. So it kind of teaches your brain that what you do matters and will lead to results, which feels really nice. And sometimes, especially when we're not doing a lot like we end up doing in the winter, it feels really nice to feel like you're achieving something or moving toward some sort of goal. It also decreases your stress response, which I try to teach as much as possible. That it doesn't have to be an hour or two at the gym. Honestly, if you're feeling stressed out in the moment, just stand up and do 20 jumping jacks, get your heart rate up, and you'll feel better. That's beside the point, but you should know it anyway. The next one, sleep. So we've talked a lot about melatonin and how we always feel like we want to sleep. I am here to give you permission to sleep. Maybe don't fall asleep at 4:30 when the sun is going down. But if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, it's 8:30 and I'm this tired, it's okay to like go to bed earlier in the winter, right? And to do less, to achieve less in your day, because the day is shorter and we have less of us, right, to give to the world. So if you find yourself feeling like, I think I'm ready for bed, right? Do that. The other thing too is that what's tricky about sleep is that you have to make sure that it's quality and making it count, right? So I'm going to be the one to tell you to not sleep with your phone next to you. Try not to look at screens, including your phone, for at least an hour before bed, because the blue light is going to mess with your brain. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but just trust me. And do some things. And the reason about not sleeping with your phone in your room is because your brain is the same reason I don't like having phones on desks at, if you see me, like when I'm teaching in person, I don't like people to have their phone on their desk. Even if it's turned off, it actually is a cue for distraction for people. People will start thinking like, oh, that's right, there's that email I didn't respond to, or, oh, I wonder if my Amazon package ever made it, right? You kind of start thinking about the things that are on your phone, even if you're not looking at it. So that's why just keep your phone out of the room. You won't even think about it. And then the last thing is do some things to cue your body for brain, or for brain, cue your body and your brain for sleep. So helping your body like turn on all that melatonin, right? Get your hypothalamus pumping the melatonin into your body. And so I'm thinking like tea and candles, right? Pajamas, maybe reading a book. Does anyone have anything that they like to do before bed that helps them kind of unwind and get ready for sleep that they find is helpful? Journaling. Journaling is good for a lot of reasons. Thank you, Mackenzie. It also offloads a lot of the stress of the day. And you can also, meditation music. Ooh, never listen. We listen to audiobooks at our house. A lot of Harry Potter. Glass of milk. Damn, nice. Man, I used to love warm milk as a kid. Meditation music, hang out with your cat. Nice. I also love dog snuggles. I knew what you were saying, Evelyn. Not medication music, but more meditation music. Audiobooks is a great idea. My eyes always hurt by the end of the day, so I end up looking at screens. Yeah. I know what you mean, Mackenzie. It's hard for me too. That's why I try to, well, we'll get to that point too in a minute, but about screens and watching TV. Audiobooks is great. My husband is dyslexic, so he's always used Audible, and I got hooked on it with the Game of Thrones series because those books are hard to read. Holy moly. I was like, who is this? I don't remember this name. So I highly recommend it. The only thing is it's on my phone, so I have to keep my phone like in the hallway. I have to get better about that. Thanks everyone for sharing. These are really good ideas. Yeah, so cueing your brain, right? And trying to do it without screens, doing it in ways that your brain will appreciate, right? And actually settle. The last one is therapy. Always good for us, right? Especially in the winter, if you're feeling, I like therapy in the winter, especially because I feel like she holds me accountable. And I'm saying like, yeah, I don't know, I haven't been feeling like myself. She's like, okay, well, why haven't you been going to your dance class? And I'm like, because I'm lazy, because I don't feel like it. And she's, so having someone there to talk to and validate, but also help you, problem solve. Therapy is always great. I'm just such a big advocate for therapy for a lot of reasons. And speaking of therapy, how many of you have heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy? I'm seeing some nods. Okay, great. So when I'm talking about this with beating the winter blues, cognitive behavioral therapy is to lopsided, I guess is the right word. It comes at it from two different angles. The first one is cognitive, our thoughts, right? So this is things like, instead of thinking, oh gosh, I hate winter, or oh, it's just so miserable outside, trying to shift that into, hey, in 39 days, we're going to have sun out at 7, right? Just shifting what you're focusing on, and even shifting the narrative. So instead of saying, I hate winter, saying, I prefer summer. Just, you're not lying, right? You're not trying to change how your attitude is about winter. You're just shifting the conversation you're having with yourself in your head all the time. And behavioral. So this is things like making yourself go outside, making yourself go to dance class, making yourself bundle up so that you're comfortable. This might be where I had the other. Yes. So this is the other piece of the other behavioral piece is traditions. So we talked a lot about holidays and why December is not so bad, because you have the romantic, fluffy, beautiful white first snowfall, and things are getting, the days are getting shorter, and you can wrap presents next to the fireplace. And then come February, you're like, get me out of the house, right? So creating, my mom always hated February too, because like her birthday was in January. So you had all the holidays, and then it's New Year's, and then mom's birthday. But then it's like, come February, it's like you have Valentine's Day, I guess. Like, there's nothing really to look forward to, right? So making traditions that you can actually look forward to in February and March, and January, right? That you can look forward to and make your own, so that you have things that, even if the weather is bad and the days are shorter, there's something positive during that time of year. Does anyone have any traditions that they do, or things that they celebrate during that time of year? Aside from like the ones that we know. If not, that's fine. Think of one you want to share. I'm going to start. Dad's birthday. Nice, Tina. Yeah. My daughter's birthday is in March. We're going to do a big tea party. She turns 3, and she's already picked out the balloons and the cake. And it's going to have a unicorn on it. So get ready, Minneapolis. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to ruin your night with is a very brief explanation of screens. So we talked about them before bed, right? And the blue light triggers your brain to be kind of turned on, and it makes it harder to wind down because your eyes are still kind of working. So the first thing I want to say, like a couple of rules around screens, just having some boundaries, right? I'm not telling you to throw your phone away, but not at night, right? We talked about why. And also not first thing in the morning. And this is just good for in general, but especially when you're more prone to negative affect, like we all are in the winter, right? In the morning, I like to say, like, keep your morning sacred, right? So don't grab your phone and look at it right away in the morning and check your email. And this is something I'm really bad at. This is something I'm really bad at. I'm trying to be better about. But if you wake up and let yourself, put on your slippers and go pour your cup of coffee and kind of look at the sunrise or whatever, pet your dog, play with your cat, and then start your day, you're a lot less likely to start your day with cortisol and the stress response, right? And feeling like you already have a million things you need to do. Mackenzie says she recently deleted all her social media apps off her phone because I would get stuck scrolling as soon as I opened my eyes. Made a big difference. Yeah, I can believe that. I remember, this dates me. I remember when Facebook was only on the computer. And like, if you had to like boot up your laptop to like log into Facebook, it was a whole thing. It was, man, smartphones changed everything. The other thing I'm going to say is try to make it social. So this is my rule with my kids for a number of reasons. Otherwise, they just look at their iPad or whatever, is that if we look at screens, we do it together. And so the reason being, it's okay, I remember before computers. Thanks, Mark. I also remember, I remember when we got our first word processor. That was an exciting time. And so we want to, so remember, one of the recommendations on beating winter blues is increasing connection, right? And so if we make screen time social, where we're sitting down and watching a Netflix show together, what ends up happening is we end up enjoying ourselves and laughing together. So laughter is so positive for a lot of reasons. It doesn't have to be laughter. I find it helpful, especially in the winter, to watch comedies as opposed to things that depress me and make me think more. And laughter is so good for us physiologically and psychologically. So the first thing it does is it stimulates all of our organs because it increases our O2, right? We're laughing, we're actually taking these deep breaths from our belly that we're always trying to do in meditation, right? And trying to get ourselves to do that to lower our stress response. We do it naturally when we're laughing, and we're doing it kind of quickly. So it's actually really good for our lungs and all our organs. And the next thing it does is it actually does the same thing that cold air or jumping in, to a cold shower does, is it has this quick increase and drop in our stress response. So it kind of gets your body to, and what ends up happening is it's like this big tense and then like a huge sigh and tons of muscle relaxation. And the other thing that I love about laughter that I won't try to nerd out too much about, but what's interesting, so we're more likely to laugh with the presence of other people. That we know from studies. What we also know is that the reason why we laugh, especially at comedies and jokes, is that it cues other people in our in-group. So especially, I'm really fascinated by dark humor. So I work with a lot of nurses and they'll say some stuff that if you don't get it, you're like, wow, they just said that, right? But the reason is that it's kind of this test of trust of, are you in my in-group, or can I trust you with this, or are you not? And we do that even with not necessarily dark humor, but all types of humor. So even if we're watching just a silly cat and dog video, right? It kind of cues people into our in-group of, hey, isn't that funny, right? Which increases our connection and deepens our connection with other people. That was all the content I had. I can't believe it's already all the way through. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I wanted to leave a bunch of time for questions and kind of a conversation, because I think it helps. Studies show that when we talk about, this is what I'm going to do differently, or this is what I'm going to take away from it, if we share that with other people, we're more likely to actually follow through on it. That's due to something called cognitive dissonance, which you all would find interesting, even though other people in other seminars might not. So hang on, I'm going to remove the spotlight so I can see everyone. And gallery. Okay, perfect. So did anything stand out from today that you thought, oh man, this is something I'm going to take with me after tonight?
The fact about all the screens, it's we rely so much on our phone, even for alarms.
Yeah.
Just leave it close by so you can actually hear it or whatever. But it's just something that we're so used to by now. It's a hard habit to break, but I don't think it's impossible either.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I really want to get an old phone. A flip phone. I really do. I really do. I'm like, I want Google Maps, and that's maybe it. I just need to know where I'm going. Anything else stand out? Thanks, Tanya.
So I grew up in a winter that lasts only 2 months, and the lowest temperature is 35 degrees.
Oh my gosh, where did you grow up?
Argentina. So I've been living in Minnesota for almost 6 years. And
Wow.
yeah, I do notice a change in my mood during especially November and December, because it's super gray. Sometimes there's snow. I don't know, but I think that what I might take away is get myself outside, because I noticed that people from Minnesota want their kids to go outside, even if it's super cold. but like to play, to adapt to the temperatures. So I was a nanny for a while, and yeah, it was super cold, super gray, but we will play outside, and that made the difference.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I have to do it by myself. It's harder, like doing it myself.
It does help to have kids. Everett,
Mhm.
Everett is 6 and he does not like going out. He would rather. He also just recently got a Nintendo, which I have a love-hate with. Yeah, Mark's like, the 3-year-old Audra is constantly saying, Mom, we got to take Lando for a walk. And I'm like, ugh. Yeah, we do, right? And they do. And if they're crabby, I just make them go outside and just like 5 minutes of fresh air, they're so much better. And I like when we're the same, right? Adults are the same. It's not just kids. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway, and something that I guess I never thought about before, was just kind of reframing your thoughts from I hate winter, this is horrible, and it's lasting forever, to focus on like kind of the more positive aspects. Like I do enjoy the comfy, cozy feeling and like the candles and like Christmas lights. And so I think that that is really helpful just in the way that we think about the winter season. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I recently let myself get a fancy new candle, like the wood wick, that like crackles. It was like $10. It was a very expensive candle, but I'm like, for winter, it does feel like a special treat, right?
Definitely.
Allowing, and the one thing, that is the thing I forgot to write down, but I wanted to mention. So Leibovitz, the gal that does the studies in like Norway and Sweden, she was talking about mentality, right? And how the way we think about it, you can shift. There's a lot of it that's biological, but if you shift your perception around it, it can change your mood, right? Which we know in a lot of different psychology realms. She did want to mention, though, she wants to make it clear that it only works if the infrastructure is around that too, right? So her example is like people experiencing homelessness, right? Winter is a lot worse to be, so not a good time to be without shelter. So it's not, you can't magic wish your way out of everything, right? And I mean, with the increase in remote work, it's maybe not as big of a deal, but like winter commuting is really hard, right? And that's a reality. And so kind of reframing, I don't know, maybe planning around that, right? Doing other behavioral things around how is it that you can get to work on time? Can you leave a little earlier? Can you have your coffee in the car? Whatever it is, right? So it's kind of the combination between behavior and the cognition, right? The CBT. So thank you for sharing, Mackenzie.
Yeah, I also thought it was really interesting that the Scandinavian countries like have that type of infrastructure in place. Like who would think to take like a gondola to the top of a mountain just to be closer to the sun? I think that that's really cool, and Minnesota needs to get on something like that.
I'm glad you also thought it was cool. I thought I was being super nerdy by putting it in, but I didn't care at the time.
There is one in Duluth. I lived there for 3 years. So it goes up to the top of Spirit Mountain. And then you can either like, they have this like kind of roller coaster thing, kind of like toboggan sled thing that you can take down. So it's winter activity and something fun. I kind of took away like being intentional about getting outside, but also like having an intentional gratitude practice with my time outside, so that I'm not like focusing on how cold it is or how windy it is, but like being focused on like the beauty around me or something about the landscape that I didn't notice before or something like that, so that my focus is more positive.
Elsewhere. Nice, Serena. Well, make sure you cue in April too, because I'll be making you all do that actually. It'll just be more enjoyable in April, but allow yourself to. So one thing, so I'm going to make you do an outdoor, like a nature meditation thing, which won't take too long, but one thing too is like, it's okay to be like, oh, my feet are cold, right? And to like, let yourself be like, oh, my feet are cold. And also it's really pretty out, right? Like, it's not necessarily trying to distract from the discomfort of winter, but also enjoying the good things too, right? So I appreciate that. That's, yeah. So I feel that same way where I'm like, yes, I'll just get outside, get this walk over with, right? Change your mindset.
I think like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just asked if anyone else had anything else. But
Oh, I was just
He
gonna
does.
say, like, I thought it was interesting that you talked about like how in those countries they have more of a focus on like being comfortable and prepared for the weather. That's something that I have a problem with myself, is that I think that one of the reasons why I don't like winter is because I'm not very well prepared for it. So I don't put myself in situations where I'm going to be uncomfortable. And I didn't really think that to change that. So that, yeah, that was helpful as well.
There was a time, it was, I can't remember, I lost track. It was one of the snowfalls where it wasn't really cold and like the snow was sticky and pretty, and it was kind of recent. And my son wanted to go out and make a snowman. And I'm like, you know what? I have nothing going on this afternoon. Let's do it. And so I actually put on snow pants, which I haven't worn since like, I don't know when, right? Like I have them because you're in Minnesota, you need them, but like I never actually wear them. And I put them on, put on my boots with extra socks and like gloves and did all the thing. And it was like, we were out there for a really long time and I really enjoyed it. And I never once thought about how uncomfortable I was. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about that too. Although it's a lot of work to get ready to go outside too, you know, when you're depressed and lethargic and you're like, that's too hard. I don't want to do that. Right. So, and it's like that constant balance, right, between the cognition and the behavior, and how is it that we get ourselves to be motivated to do that. Did you learn anything, Mark? Did I teach you anything?
Well, I was reminded of, that's why parents send kids outside, because the kids get in a better mood, and because they're away from you, you get in a better mood.
This is true.
Yeah. So as a kid, we were sent out all the time.
Yep.
And so, you know, by the time you get to be Mackenzie's age, it's not a problem because you were spent your whole life outside in the winter.
It's true. It's true. Yep. Yeah. I just got to get outside more. It's just also been, I thought it was so interesting that we scheduled we were talking about this at a time where it was so cold and nasty. It was like early January. And then yesterday, how many of you felt different yesterday? Right? It was like you walking down the street, everyone's like just in a sweatshirt and like, hey, how's it going? Like total strangers, like, oh, it's gorgeous out, right? And stuff's melting. And it's just so interesting how it made it just being easier to be outside, totally shifted everyone's mindset and the entire feel.
Yeah, and that would have been the coldest day of the year in Argentina.
It's true. It's true. Although when you think about it, I was thinking like, okay, it was -17 and I got up to like almost 40, right? Which is a swing of 57 degrees. That's huge. That's going from freezing to upper 80s. That's, yeah, it was a big, so it's not surprising that it felt amazing, because it did. You're absolutely right, Jessica. It's a workout putting all your kids in their snowsuits and stuff and their Ralphie gear. Okay, well, does anyone have questions for me at all? Okay, if not.
I have
Okay.
one, because we talked about melatonin.
Yeah.
There's always like all these commercials about melatonin pills or whatnot. Is that good or bad? Is that gonna screw up our own melatonin production, or is it gonna actually help it?
So I'm not a doctor, but what I understand is that a lot of people from what I know, a lot of people take melatonin because they have a hard time sleeping. Okay, so they take it with hopes of, instead of taking something like Unisom, right, like a sleeping pill, they take melatonin because it's natural, right? But I think you're on to the right thought process that I wouldn't doubt, just like any other kind of hormone therapy, right? If you're ingesting it in another way, and then your body is going to kind of counterbalance itself and maybe not make it as much. The other thing too is that it makes you tired. So, which is kind of would make seasonal affective disorder worse, right? Like you would think it would make it worse because we have too much of it this time of year. So I would hesitate to take it unless some like a doctor told you to, right? And explain why. And drug companies could not advertise on TV. Wow, that I don't remember. That I don't remember, Mark. That's a different America you grew up in. I grew up watching Judge Judy and learning all about all the old people pills that you.
We did get cigarette commercials,
Oh, okay. I mean, you win some, you
and
lose.
everything's a balance. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's a balance. Good. Those probably came in right at the, if the cigarette commercials went out and then the pharmaceutical companies went in, I would imagine, right? It's probably around that same time.
I'm sure TV said, look, we need some money coming in from somewhere.
Exactly. Who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for Garfield and Friends? I mean, if it's not, what's his name? The camel. It's going to be Pfizer. Zarina, did you want to say something or ask something?
Yeah, okay, so I'm in your psych 349 class.
Oh, you
So
are. Oh, no.
learning about drive states. How does that change with seasons? Can you add to that?
So, well, I kind of touched on it. I can't remember if you did you come in a few minutes late? I can't remember.
Well, you mentioned drive states and the hypothalamus, and I
So
got
so
that.
right. So drive states, right, are when our body is being cued to meet a need, right? So the seasonal affective disorder, like let me think this through. With the shift in time of day, right, and length of the day, those cues are changing our drive states related to sleep, right? So if we're looking outside and it's dark, it's going to change our drive state from okay, time to wake up to okay, time to fall asleep, right? So it's going to cue our body to do something different to meet a different need, as opposed to like, okay, you need to be unconscious soon, as opposed to you need to get more conscious. It's kind of getting messed up from the external cues. Does that make sense? So like like it's shifting, with seasonal affective, well, with seasonal change, right? It absolutely messes with our drive state, especially with sleep, which is what we've been talking about a lot today. Sleep, and also like our other, so we talked about like carbs, right? So we need serotonin levels to feel nice. And so we're getting them in other ways. So I crave candy like crazy around Halloween. I think that's maybe part of why we give out candy, in all honesty. And that's because the days are getting shorter. I'm getting sadder. So I'm literally eating my feelings with sugar to get serotonin. And so that's the drive state that I'm getting. And if I just listen to my body, like anyone should, I would be like, oh, Laura, you're just sad. It's because it's shorter days and it's getting colder out, and it's serotonin. It's not because you're actually hungry. So drive states definitely, they make us behave in certain ways. And when our external cues are kind of getting crossed, like those lines are getting crossed and we're not really sure why we're feeling a certain way, we'll sometimes act in a way that gets that need met, even if it's not addressing the actual cause of what that need is. Does that make sense? Okay. I know, like drive states are. It's a fun week.
I I kind of had a follow-up question
Yeah.
that kind of relates. So when we're talking about like light therapy, is there a point in the day where that will negatively influence your rhythm?
Ooh.
Because that was something that I thought I had experienced if I left my sad lamp on all day, and it did have different settings. So like the bright white light versus like the warmer
Yeah.
light. But I'm just curious because I know that screens
That's a
and
good
blue
question.
light does.
Yeah. So bright white light does two things. So it'll flush all that melatonin out of your system. So it's good to do it right in the morning. And it also increases brain activity. So that's why we know, like, that study in Sweden with the kids that showed, that we don't know that it'll improve performance, but we do know, as other studies show, that white light increases brain activity. And so, if you put people with bright light versus bright white light versus not having that, right, not having that condition, they have more brain activity, and so they'll actually do more, which you can theorize would lead to more productivity or better results, blah, 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 blah. So, oh man, Mark turned off his camera and then everyone shifted. Just where's Mackenzie? So I would say it's best to do it in the morning. I would recommend only using it for a couple hours, right? Not leaving it on all day, and kind of doing things like sitting by the window, right? And being outside. And then definitely don't use the bright white, probably it's almost like caffeine this is my gut telling me. I don't know this for sure, but like almost like you wouldn't drink coffee at 4 p.m. So you kind of want to start stopping those behaviors that'll increase brain activity. That makes sense. From what I understand too, sad lamps are only supposed to be used for a few hours a day, because they can lead to like migraines and stuff. But that's all I know about it.
Always that it was the more than better. I don't know. Because
Say
I
that
have
again?
one too. And I have one too, and I turn it on as soon as I wake up, and it did help. And so I will just leave it on, and it's like, okay, now I have a headache. So I always say it was like the more light, the better, or I guess that's not the case.
Yeah, it's kind of, and it gotta, even being outside, you can think about it too. Like if you sit outside to read or do anything, right? You sit outside to do it, after a while, your head does start to hurt, right? It's not just like sunburn that you have to worry about. It's also like the eye strain. And so, yeah, I think that's maybe why they used to just be prescription, is that there are like limits that, I don't know. I'm sure you can find it though a little easier now than you could, 20 years ago online. So
I know full spectrum light bulbs don't have the same headache and time restraints that a sad light would have. And you can actually put them like in your bedroom or in the room that you spend the most amount of time with and have them on all day, and it doesn't like have any impact.
yeah, and they look nice. I don't know, it does feel like you're walking outside. I remember I used to work at a shelter, and they had like these big long hallways, and one light in the ceiling, like they were all like warm lights, like fluorescent, and then they must have just ran out of the same light bulb, and they had one single full spectrum light in there. And I remember walking down the hallway being like, did someone leave a door open, like a window open? I was like looking, trying to figure out why it looked like there was a window open in the middle of the hallway. And then I finally figured out, oh, it's this crazy light bulb that makes it look like we're outside. Yeah, they're super nice, Mackenzie. Totally.
I have like one last question, and I don't know
Yeah.
if you know anything about this, but I'm just curious
Try
if
me.
you know if seasonal affective disorder affects people that live in other parts of the world that aren't as extreme as here in Minnesota. And also if it affects people the other way, like can people get sad going into like the summer months? I'm just curious. I don't know if there's even
That's
an answer.
interesting. I'm not entirely sure. Well, knowing what we do about SAD is that because it's that change in it's the circadian rhythm combined with the excess melatonin, right, is kind of what leads to the symptoms that we call seasonal affective disorder. And so the circadian rhythm can absolutely get messed up when you go close to the equator, right? And you have light all day. Or no, I'm sorry. The light all day stuff is in the same parts of the world, right? Right? Like yeah. So I don't think so. Hang on, sorry, I had to talk that through. It's like my geography is not super strong. Knowing what we know, right? So it's like for people in Alaska, it's either they have 1 hour of daylight in December versus 23 hours of daylight in the summer. And so it's almost, I don't want to say it's the same, but I would imagine that they have other issues that come with it's maybe not enough melatonin in the summer, where it's like you don't get a cue at all to fall asleep, as opposed to too many cues. So I think there's probably something that is called it's probably something else that would relate to that. And then I don't know about other parts of I think it exists less and less the further, like closer to the equator you get, right? Because there's just not that same shift in daylight. And I actually think that it's less, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's less in parts of the world that don't follow daylight savings time, because you're actually experiencing the daylight like in its entirety and you're not inside for the entire daylight, right? So like right now it would be 7 o'clock. And do we have twilight? I'm trying to look. I can't quite see, but it's like it gets, darker a lot later. And so after work, you still have an hour or two of daylight, as opposed to getting home and it's dark. So I think that's also related.
I remember when I was little, it wasn't bad because we were always outside, and I grew up in Mexico City. So it gets cold, but not as cold. And even if it was like, it got dark, there was a bunch of people still outside. Because
Right.
you just don't need that many layers on to be outside. So it was nicer in that way.
Right. Because it's not, the seasonal affective disorder isn't really about the cold, right? It's about the daylight, which I think is what I learned the most, because I always thought it was like a combination. It's kind of this, I hate winter, and everything that comes with it. But I realized I'm like, oh no, yeah, it's totally just how light messes with our biology, and it kind of shifts us into thinking we need to sleep all the time. And you don't, but you can. It's also okay.
I'd like to speak in defense of standard time.
Oh no.
If we were on daylight savings time, it wouldn't get light till like 9 in the morning. I mean, how are you going to get up and go somewhere if it's dark until 9 in the morning? If I'm on daylight savings time in late December.
I feel like we've talked about daylight savings time and self-care so like in this before. Didn't we end on?
I think it's because you hate standard time.
There's also studies, Mark, of like, I haven't talked about cops for years, so I'm trying not to be triggering here. There's a study on cops who are both within and out of, and sleep deprivation is what it was. It was presented at SPSP, but they looked at like aggression on the nights on the behalf of the cops on nights where daylight savings time turns. So they're actually they have like an hour of sleep behind. And so it messes up their biology. I mean, I get it. I don't want to get up. I don't want to get up when it's dark out and it's cold. Like, ugh. But anything that I can.
And you have to shovel before you drive to work.
Yeah, but then you get home, all that is done, and you still have 2 hours of daylight.
I don't think it's that good. You're
don't think
confusing
so?
summer and winter.
Maybe.
It'll stay light till 5:30 instead of 4:30 or 5 instead of 4. You're still not
Yeah.
home from work yet.
I mean, maybe. What is the earliest that the sun sets in Minnesota? I'll have to look this up. We'll get back to you all. Follow. Maybe I'll have answers in April, post springing forward.
But I
Mark,
think, yeah, you're just too far from the equator, really, I think is your problem. You want it all steady all the time.
yeah, that would be nice. I don't think I'm alone in that. I do, but I also really enjoy winter. Like, I don't mind the cold. It really is kind of this time of year. It's the February, March. That's really
Well,
hard.
yeah, I mean, it's that I can understand. I'd hate to be in Alaska with that variability in the time, in the length of daylight.
That'd be
You
so
know, it's like,
cool.
okay, this time of year we get 1 hour, and then we get up to 4 hours, then we're up to 10 hours, and then we're 14 hours, and then 20 hours. And I mean,
I can't imagine. I mean, how do you
those
go to
changes.
How do you go to bed when there's 20 hours of daylight? How do you sleep? No, not for me. Not for
We
me.
have dark clinics as they do light clinics. Yeah, I don't know.
Ooh, maybe. Or like sunset lamps as opposed to like
Yes.
close
But
all
then
the
again,
curtains.
You have
know,
to have those like blackout blinds.
Yeah. Well, I know that
So
those are
it
cute.
looks super dark.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Now you guys got me thinking about like the other side of all this. I mean, I gotta think more than just myself. Thanks, Mark.
I have cousins who live in Alaska, and they have been known to wash their cars at 2 a.m. because it's been light out, and all
else
the
are you gonna
rooms
do?
have blackout curtains. They also work from home in the wintertime, so they sleep a lot more. More.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you like I'm sure. And I almost wonder if after, so long of kind of letting your body listen to itself, right? And sleeping more when it's dark and then less when it's light, like, did it get tired in the summer? Like maybe your body really doesn't actually need it in the summer. I don't know. I know, like, I get tired, but I have 2 kids and a vitamin D deficiency, so not a good one to ask. And I hate daylight savings time.
I was gonna ask really quickly. You said it changed drastically for you. In what way?
Yeah.
Taking vitamin D.
Yeah. So I actually had no idea what was going on. I actually thought I was pregnant because I was so tired. And I don't know if any of you have ever been pregnant, but like get like knocked out. No, Mark, never. Okay. So you get really tired. Like just so like there was a time where in the middle of a work day in my office and it was like 11 o'clock and I'm like, I'm kind of tired. I'm going to lay down. And I slept for 3.5 hours on the floor of my office. I'm like, this is not normal. And it never really went away. And I thought, I did all the like self internal, like, is it not sleeping well? Is it the quality of sleep? Is it, I'm, having bad habits of like keeping me up, whatever. I tried to do everything. And then I talked to my doctor. I finally just emailed her and she's like, oh, you come in, we'll just make sure it's not, we'll just run some labs, just make sure there's nothing going on. And I had like no vitamin D in my system. So she recommended 5,000 international units, which is a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And she's like, yeah, just take that. And, after like 2 days, I felt better. It's just like, I still feel tired, like I feel, but like a normal amount of tired in the winter. I wasn't just like knocked out. So if you're feeling that and you're wondering why, it's just like a simple blood test and they scanned for like cholesterol and a bunch of other stuff. I don't know. That was the one. She's like, oh, iron was the other thing. She's like, oh, maybe it's an iron deficiency. That runs in my family. I'm like, well, that makes sense. No, it wasn't iron. It was vitamin D. So, and that was like in the fall, actually. So that wasn't even in the middle. That wasn't like December, January. It was like actually when I should have at least some, but yeah.
Interesting. That does
Yeah,
make a
yeah. It
difference.
also helps your mood. So it's not just like fatigue, it also boosts your mood. It does a lot of good things for you. So it's definitely, and like, you know, it's a vitamin, it's not medication. So it doesn't have a whole bunch of weird effects. So I recommend it if, yeah,
Thank you.
for sure. Well, I don't want to keep you guys over time, which I have already by a few minutes, but this was a lot of fun talking with you all. I hope to see you all again in April. And I forgot to send out Mackenzie's beautiful flyer to my classes. I was going to, you know, ask Zarina's classmates to come too. So I'll make sure that I get the word out for the next one. And yeah, feel free. I'm going to plot my
But
email.
you're doing another session again, right? When is that?
April 20th. April 20th at 4 p.m. on Zoom.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sure Mackenzie will be sending out more information as the date approaches. The topic will be fresh air and self-care, the positive psychology of the outdoors. I think that's what we landed on. And yeah, so come prepared to learn. And that one's going to be a little bit more of like a go outside and do a thing and come back and tell me what it feels like. It's going to be a little bit more interactive, but which I hope is well received. We'll see. My email is laura.harder at, oh my gosh. My computer is up on a stand. So you're welcome, Jess. There we go. So feel free to email me if you have any questions or want to chat more. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you all again in a couple months.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Laura. That was
Thank you. This
awesome.
was a lot of fun. Thanks for showing
Yeah.
up, and
Yeah.
we'll see you guys soon.
All right. Thank
Good
you.
luck with the rest of your
everybody.
semester.
Yeah, you too.